What the people of the land of Thomas are like, amid what customs I live, are you interested to know? Upon this coast there is a mixture of Greeks and Getae. It derives more from the scarce pacified Getae, where the hordes of Sarmatians and Getae go and come upon their horses along the roads. Among them there is not one who does not bear quiver and bow, and darts yellow with viper's gall. Harsh voices, grim faces, surest indication of their minds, neither hair nor beard trimmed by practised hand. Right hands not slow to stab and wound with the knife which every barbarian wears fastened to his side. Hello, I'm Janos Jalic, otherwise known as MIG Mergitzer. Welcome to Radio Pannonia, Episode 2. Welcome to the Sarmatians. And, well, the Sarmatians, they existed alongside the Scythians for much of their early history, starting from about, the early 600s-ish BC. That's where we right about see them. They're mostly Indo-Iranian. That means they're coming from right about the Iranian plateau, and their first appearance is usually as the Sarmatians, as Scythian allies during Darius I's invasion into Scythia, and they basically showed up there, did some guerrilla tactics, helped Darius I get his butt out of there, because they're like, nope, we do not want to deal with mounted archers today, so bye. And they organize, and eventually over time, the Sarmatians are organized into a few primary groups. They're known as first the Sarmatai, then the Aorsi, the Saracis, Aizaiges, and the Roxolani. Most of their range goes over the old Scythian lands. This especially happens after they actually just straight up take over the Scythian lands. But it shouldn't be said that they are enemies. More like their neighbors, and occasionally bad things happen. And the Scythians already have a lot of other problems, namely like Macedonians, Celts, all sorts of different stuff that eventually just kind of makes whatever power they have go kaput. And they are often also, and the Sarmatians are also often regarded as the inspiration behind the Amazons, also known as the warrior women. Thank you, Wonder Woman. All right. And usually, I think it's Herodotus specifically, he actually says that Sarmatai are basically a combination of the Scythians and the Sarmatians having some fun times. And it's very clear that, much like the Amazons, the women fought alongside men in the Sarmatians, and there's even some theory that the entire Sarmatian society was actually matriarchal, although that has not been confirmed yet, so don't go too crazy. And they were often buried with weapons, like the Scythians before them, and they were also having bowed legs. This is kind of a bit of a stereotype when it comes to steppe warriors. Mostly if you're hearing them being described in the European records, you'll especially see this whenever we cover the Huns. And there is some speculation that, right past that. So as the Sarmatians' grazing range expands into the Carpathians, they run to Rome, specifically Pannonia. Pannonia is actually not just the name of this podcast, it's also the name of the Roman colony that extends right up until the Danube. In fact, we have a little bit of Budapest, specifically the west side, that is known as Akvincum to the Romans, and that's slowly getting founded as the Sarmatians are expanding their range and running straight into the Romans. The Romans contend with them rather evenly, and they think, well, maybe since our cavalry, as usual, is rather a bit useless, we might as well just hire the Sarmatians to do the job for us, and that's what they do. Basically, the Romans start building their cavalry along the Sarmatian lines, and they have and that means that the Sarmatians give them basically mounted archers and lancers, and this leads to a lot of intermixing and interbreeding, and sometimes the Sarmatians even get about as far as Britain, and in fact in Britain they they are believed to be part of the inspiration behind the Knights of the Round Table, which seems a bit odd until you remember one of their more famous customs. You see, they, of course, were anointing their god of war, which the Romans knew as Mars, and they would actually anoint him by sticking a sword in the ground and then dropping some oil or blood or whatever. And that's where apparently is possibly one of the theories about where the whole sword in the stone story came from, but there's a lot of different theories in there, and I imagine we're going to fit a couple more of those whenever the Celts come into town. And as the Sarmatians are living in the general Carpathian Basin / where Ukraine is today, they start encountering a few other enemies, such as Celts and the Goths and the Huns. The Celts, they are eventually pushed back, but the Goths really become a serious problem, and but eventually they start moderating each other out, butting up, and the Sarmatians actually basically teach the Goths how to handle horses, which kind of comes in handy when the Goths gotta make a big trek. Basically, like the Huns rolled into town, and the Goths and the Sarmatians both kind of got wrecked, so they both have to run. And right around the 5th century is when we see the Saracens and the Eorsi show up in the historical picture, and they actually have a relationship with the Bosporan Kingdom, which is in eastern Anatolia, and they fought in the Bosporan War in AD 49, and this war has basically had a lot of problems, namely that the Bosporan king decided after a good long reign he would split his empire between his kids, because that works every time. And the Saracens are weakened by war, and they are eventually absorbed by the Eorsi, and the Eorsi are absorbed by the Alans. And then here we get to the Roxolani and the Azagyes. And the Roxolani and the Azagyes, they're the first to really seriously settle on the Hungarian plain, like first here to stay, and they're also the first guys to really encounter the Romans in 16 BC. And they were fought off by the government of Macedonia, and then they served as mercenaries for Rome and many Germanic tribes because they realized, hey, we might as well get this money while we can. And Rome and the Romans in particular actually had plans to make the Sarmatian lands a Roman province under Marcus Aurelius, but that never really came to fruition. And it is around this time that 8,000 were sent to Britannia as hostages under the command of Lucius Artorius Castus. That is a King Arthur reference, if I've ever heard one. And yes, in case you're wondering, that is the name that they actually used for that one really bad King Arthur movie a bajillion years ago, like in the early 2000s. And also, this is right around the time that the Goths show up, and they push the Sarmatians to resettle on the Roman border, although the Alans also show up right around here, and they start also mixing with the Goths. And their first major raid is actually in Armenia in 73 AD. To put this into perspective, this is right around the time that the Second Temple, I believe, got destroyed. Yeah. And they reached Volga, and the Alans and the Goths, they mixed together, taught each other things, mated, got some good horses, and then the Huns kind of roam in, and they force the Sarmatians to either join with them or die. Some of the Sarmatians go with the Goths, and they help the Goths over at Adrianople in 378 AD. And they do some good stuff there, and eventually this leads to the Goths gaining power within Roman Spain and Roman Italy. And some of them also go with the Vandals to North Africa, although they are ultimately betrayed by the time that the Sarmatians actually set up, and by the time the Vandals actually set up their kingdom in North Africa, they've slaughtered all the Sarmatians, which kind of gets a little bit ironic because the Vandal king at the time actually calls himself the Rexus Sarmaticus, which basically means King of the Sarmatians, and I'm just like, kind of strange considering that you killed all your Sarmatians. Maybe don't do that. Anyways, enough unfortunately, the Sarmatians basically disappear after the death of Attila the Hun, and some islands also vanish into the Caucasus. I think specifically Ossetia, which is a bit quite west, and they stick around there for a good long while, well into, I believe, the 1200s, 1300s, because they are later seen fighting the Mongols, although I imagine with updated equipment. Actually, on the note of their equipment, the Sarmatians are mostly known for some very heavy scale armor, a lot less elaborate armor than the Scythians, but still not unfancy. And they're also quite known for the long lance, known to the Romans as the Contus Sarmaticus, and they're also big on swordsmanship, and it's likely that they either used a relatively long sword or the Roman spada, which is also slowly evolving into the famous medieval arming sword. I'm not going to say broadsword because that is a cringe phrase for anybody who knows medieval weapons history. And much like the Scythians before them, they loved using the composite bow. First, they picked up the Scythian one because they're right next door to the Scythians. Then the Hunnic ones when the Huns rolled into town. They're also quite notable for using ring pommels. That's actually relatively rare outside of China, so that's interesting. And there's also some thinking that some of the early Sarmatian shores were Persian Akanakis, I believe that is called, and they are also known for adding on sword beads. They're also known for inventing the Spangenhelm, which is basically this conical helmet that later on gets a nose guard, and it's pretty simple, redirects the blows properly, and basically this becomes the evolution for the medieval helmet that you'll see very early on in the Middle Ages, such as at the Battle of Hastings. And they're also quite known for the tamga, which is the stick symbol for their stick symbols for their tribes, clans, or families. This is basically the inspiration behind early heraldry. They're also known for basically crinoline, their horse's mane, which basically means they have to take their horse's mane, make it look like the top of that one thing on the castles. And they also were able to figure out a way to document what sort of horses they had in their possession. So, like, the tail was actually knotted, and it denoted age and the age of the horse, the sex of the horse, and how long it had been trained. And they were also known for using the horn saddle and the Draco standard. And if you think that's another Arthurian reference, in case you're wondering, yes, you are indeed right. That is actually another Arthurian reference, because there's a lot of early thinking that whoever was the inspiration behind King Arthur used a dragon-shaped standard as a windsock and also as a battle flag. So that's probably where the whole Pendragon thing came from for King Arthur stuff. We also know very little of the Sarmatian religion, but we do believe that they adopted a couple of Greek gods and goddesses, such as Aphrodite, and the earliest reference to this we have is a bas-relief from, I believe, the 2nd or 1st century BC, and then of course, we see some Scythian goddesses, although we can't fully identify them because the Scythians, of course, didn't write down jack crap. That's kind of the rule with nomads. We don't write anything. Kind of frustrating when you're a historian, but kind of comes with the territory. There is also some sun worship. There is some sun chariots running around. The net is actually a symbol of fertility / abundance. And there are also some beliefs in the world tree. That's probably something that they shared with their Germanic neighbors, which they have throughout their existence. Another one, their big symbols was two horses bound together. This is basically their sort of symbol of breeding. And they also had the 6-pointed star. Yeah, that sounds a little Jewish, but This means the sun. Also, apparently there is a cow cult running around. Don't ask me how I get the cow cults. I don't honestly want to know either. And apparently this cow cult was Indo-Aryan, which I guess makes sense considering that's where they got their pastoralism from. And the custom to cremate. The priests and priestesses in this cow cult were also apparently covered in cow flesh. Sounds about as gross as I can depict it. And there was also a Ukrainian belief that might have come from this, that witches became witches by passing through dead cow. Yeah, that's really, really just gross. Stop making up gross customs, nomads. It might be useful. And of course, with sun chariots come sun wheels. And also, there was this sort of thing that happened long after the Sarmatians got absorbed and lost their identity. This little phenomenon known as Sarmatism. And basically, supposedly the Sarmatians became the ancestors of the various Slavic tribes, although we're not entirely sure of this. And this supposed ancestry got taken to an extreme by notably Poland. And the Polish nobility believed that they were of Sarmatian ancestry, and they were often seen wearing nomadic costumes during the time of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. You will actually see some of the Sarmatian influences on later the famous Polish winged hussars. And of course, they're famous because, yes, meme culture, and no, I'm not singing Zapaton, because I don't have a singing voice. And so and the Polish nobles, they often wore nomadic costumes. They called themselves Sarmatians. Of course, we can't fully confirm that they had actual Sarmatian DNA, but I don't know, maybe one can dream. So anyways, this has been my little talk about the Sarmatians. And next time, running around, we're going to have the Celts. Thank you for listening to Radio Pannonia. Of course, support us on Patreon or Anchor or whatever. And love you guys. Bye. Do you have a topic that you could go on and on for hours about? Do you have a podcast that you would like to create? Would you also like unlimited uploading hours? Well then, if you answered yes to all of these 3 questions, then Anchor is the right place for you. It is owned by Spotify, and you can upload infinite hours of recording of whatever you want to talk about. So please, go to Anchor and tell them that the Radio Pannonia sent you. Have a good day. If you like this section of Radio Pannonia, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Also, be sure to follow me on whatever podcasting platform you are listening on. You can find this podcast on various platforms in the description, including Spreaker, Spotify, Anchor, etc. Follow me on Twitter at Janos for more Hungarian-related news, or YoungBards101 for my usual Twitter. Also follow me on Facebook and Tumblr, and donate to my Patreon or Anchor. Békét mindenkinek, és jó étterák a kis hadnagyjaim!